biodiesel. We like to think we're the technical experts in petroleum and renewable fuels. Had 15 years in the petroleum business, blended a lot of biofuels while I was doing that. So we've seen a lot. We have a fuel quality testing lab in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, so we see a lot of stuff come through there. We test it, we know how to test it, we know what we're looking for. So we've been kind of full circle on it. We do over 100 educational events annually, help field distributors with technical support, economics, and supply. Try to get them on board for handling it to be able to distribute to the farms. We work with government fleets, private fleets, all kinds of fleets, and technical experts in fuel-related problems, and we operate a diesel hotline, and a lot of that is funded through the soybean organization. So if you ever get into a fuel problem or have fuel issues, if you look over on our table, there's a card there that has the diesel helpline number on it. We'll also have it up at the end if you want to take a picture, but you can take one of those cards just in case you ever do have fuel issues. And the reason for that is, for those of you especially using biodiesel, if you have a fuel problem, we want that in our lab as quick as possible so that we can keep you guys having trust in the fuel and make sure that that's not a biodiesel problem, because that's a key to keeping this market growing. We'll talk about those three fuels I talked about, a little bit of market development using biodiesel, and also some common diesel issues in the end. So a little bit about biodiesel, renewable diesel, differences. People confuse it a lot, and they also confuse biodiesel plants, renewable diesel plants with plants that are just purely crushing soybeans for the oils. So not every plant, David City or Norfolk, a lot of people think that they're making biodiesel there. They're truly just crushing the beans and getting the meal and the oil. But in order to make biodiesel, they need that oil. You take that and put it through a transesterification process, fairly simple process, not overly expensive, but it comes out with a standard. So it has its own standard, B100 biodiesel to blend in all kinds of oils, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50. So just like petroleum fuels, it has its own standard. Whereas they use a hydrotreating process to make renewable diesel. You take the same feedstocks, your animal fats, your beef cooking oils, or soybean oil, corn oil, and you can make renewable diesel out of it. But they do a hydrotreating process which removes all the oxygen atoms, and that's very similar to what they do with your petroleum crude oil. That's how they make your diesel fuel. So that being said, that fuel falls under the specifications of a normal #2 diesel petroleum fuel oil. Drop in on the biodiesel side, we drop in and blends up to 20%. We're pushing, and I'll have it a little bit later. Yes sir.
Here's 30% now.
I was just going to say that, yeah. Well, I'll have that slide in a bit, and actually Blake even made me look into it here a while back. Some of their engine platforms, they'll allow up to 100% on the John Deere side. So there's 30%. We take Iowa, their best credits right now are for a 30% blend. So you've got a lot of 30% being blended. The Clean Fuels Alliance of America has groups working proficiently on building the specifications, updating the ASTM specifications to get higher blends in there. The one thing you don't want to do with biodiesel, if there's a system you can put on called an Optimus system to run 100% biodiesel. But if you have a Tier 4 engine and you have DEF and regen systems, you do not want to go over 50% biodiesel. The reason you don't want to go over 50% biodiesel is because the flash point of that product becomes high enough that your equipment's not going to regen correctly if you're trying to run the regen system on 100% biodiesel. There is systems out there that will run 100% biodiesel. Can be added on, you can run 100% biodiesel, and switch over to fuel when it regens, normal petroleum, and then when it's done regenning, we'll go back to running on 100% biodiesel. So one of the big benefits of biodiesel is its high lubricity, which is an issue that came up high lubricity and high cetane. Lubricity really became an issue when we took the sulfur out of fuel and it became ultra low sulfur fuel. So there's a lot of challenges that came along with that. Obviously they did that for environmental benefits, but it created a whole new host of challenges. The difference renewable diesel, because of the process of making it, it is also very low in lubricity, just like your ultra low sulfur diesel, petroleum diesel. So what we see a lot of people doing is maybe running, especially in California, they might be running 80% renewable diesel, 20% biodiesel like that, so that they can get that lubricity back. Biodiesel is kind of, beauty of that, available throughout the country. We're obviously always trying to grow the availability of that for people in Nebraska. Whereas renewable diesel, because of low carbon fuel markets, renewable diesel is a little more expensive to make. But they have credits in California that offset some of that higher cost. So most of that renewable diesel currently going to low carbon fuel markets. There's a little bit of a breakdown of in your renewable diesel and your biodiesel, what feedstocks are supporting that. I've always looked at it a little bit, kind of strange, because over the years that pie on soybean oil has started to shrink. We used to be 55, 60%. But when you really look at the overall market and how it's growing, the big thing about that is we went from 1.5 billion pounds of soybean oil used for biofuels in 2010 to probably 14 billion pounds we'll use in the next year. So it's not like we're using less soybean oil, the market is expanding so much that they're using all these other products to fill in as well. So a little bit about biodiesel production. Obviously, I think Brad alluded to the fact that you might see some of these arguments coming back up about food for fuel and some of that stuff. So one thing, you take your soybeans off, you take it to the crushing plant, like the new ones in David City or Norfolk, and they get the meal and the oil. Really only about 9%, 10% of that total bean goes into fuel production. The rest is used, for the meal. The meal's a large portion, 80% of the bean's meal, 20% is oil. So of that 20% of oil, about a little less than half of that is going into biofuel production. So for you guys that are on the farm trying to help yourself, if you get into a discussion like that with somebody, that's always something good to have in your back pocket to kind of dispel some of those myths. Here's a look at where all our biodiesel production plants are. We got one outlier way up in northwestern North Dakota. We got one down in Kansas, but then they're pretty well concentrated in southern Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. Again, for all the people that have concerns, you may have heard 20 years ago I tried biodiesel and we had issues. 2006, National Renewable Energy Laboratory out of Colorado went around, because there was issues in the market and people were complaining, they went around and they found out of 53 samples, or 53 producers and 14 terminals, they found that only 40% of the product out there was actually meeting spec. What was causing all our problems back then? The market was ramping up, the demand was coming in, and people were taking shortcuts. A lot of the issue was they weren't getting enough of the glycerin. So if you ever say, I use biodiesel and you plugged your filter and you took it apart and it looked just like snot or Vaseline, that's what was going on. They weren't getting enough of the glycerin. So the industry created the BQ 9000 program, industry standard, and basically today, if a producer is not in the BQ 9000 program, they're probably not staying in business because people just don't want to have a problem. They don't want to have issues. We recently, again, over 95% of them are in the BQ 9000 program, so they're spot checked on a regular, somewhat regular basis, just to make sure that we don't have off-spec biodiesel going into the market and ruining the market. So if you had a bad experience with it years ago, that was the issue, and that's been corrected. Again, we've got it for renewable diesel, petroleum diesel, and up to 5%. So that's something, to think about. You can put up to 5% biodiesel in there, and they don't consider the specifications of that combined product any different than if you have 0%. So they're that confident in the product nowadays. They have that D975 that covers everything up to 5%. 6751 is the specification for B100. Again, just kind of pointing out that biodiesel has a specification through ASTM that is approved by engine manufacturers and the whole ASTM group that puts together these specifications. Then there's a D7467. That's a specification for anything from 6% to 20%. So you should be looking for a sticker that says biodiesel blend. Anything over 5% has to have that sticker on it. If you're looking at a retail pump situation, you gotta have that sticker on there, and that'll tell you that either you're getting fuel that could have up to 5% at any given time, and you don't know it, or they're saying we have over 5% and sometimes up to 20. So benefits: detergency effect keeps your injectors and fuel system clean. It's high cetane fuel that helps with your starts, and it significantly enhances the lubricity of ultra-low sulfur, which is a key issue for us. When we came in with ultra-low sulfur diesel, when they came in with that product, in the specifications, they had to add a lubricity specification, because once they took the sulfur out of there, fuel would no longer meet the lubricity specs for these engines. So you can see biodiesel even at 2%, and 520 micrometers. It's basically they've got a steel ball, and the ball goes back and forth over this flame. And if the scar is bigger than 520 micrometers, then it does not pass the specification for the lubricity set. 2% biodiesel far exceeds what the specification is. But if you're going to a terminal, or somebody's going to one of these fuel terminals and they're picking up fuel for you, and they pick it up there, that terminal is actually injecting a lubricity additive into that fuel before it leaves the terminal, because otherwise it does not inspect. It's drop-in fuel. B20 is compatible with all of your current fueling systems. Creates less soot, decreased filter plugging, less maintenance, longer intervals in between regenerations, DPF regenerations. So we did a project with a bus company. They were having major issues. They kept plugging up their DPF filters because they were just in town, stop and start, not getting out on the road to burn these things out and clean out the DPF filters. And so they started using, what they were doing is every 3 months, 4 months, they had to pull these things out and manually clean them. Sometimes they actually had to completely replace them for $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 because they had gotten so hot and plugged that they cracked. They switched over to using B20. I mean, their maintenance costs were greatly reduced. One thing they found, because you're regenerating less often, you're burning cleaner fuel, that filter's not plugging up as fast. They're regenerating less often. They actually were using less DEF, little improved fuel economy. So it's a big reduction in their soot levels in their oil spills. That was kind of, if you can see it, that was their EGR tube and their DPF filter that they pulled when they were having issues and having to pull them at every 3 to 4 months. It's probably not that easy to see here, but you can clearly see through that secondary filter. After running that for 6 months, they just pulled that out because they wanted to see what it looked like. There was nothing telling them they needed to clean it. There was nothing telling them that they needed to change it. They just wanted to see what it looked like, and as part of our project, we wanted to know what it looked like. Another issue they were having is one of the ways that they can, when they have these regen issues, is they can do a forced regen. Well, what was happening to them is that it was so caked in those filters that when they were doing those forced regens, it was actually blowing exhaust out around the exhaust gaskets in some of these buses, and then or it would come all the way up the tailpipe, and if the wind was wrong, all of that exhaust would get into the bus, and they had a bunch of rider complaints, and people complaining about smelling exhaust in there. Sustainable, grow a new crop every year. Non-toxic, high energy balance for every unit of energy you put in, you get 3.5 units of energy back out of it. And again, we grow right here, it's made in the USA. Here's some of the projects we've done with the Nebraska Soybean Board, Nebraska Soybean sponsored. These are some of the areas where they have helped fund some blending infrastructure so that we can get increase the availability of biodiesel and get it out more in the area. That's one of our challenges. You know, we have markets, Minnesota market, they have a mandate. So at the fuel terminals, they have biodiesel right there to blend right at the terminal. In Nebraska, without mandates and things like that, the fuel terminal owners, they don't have any interest in putting those tanks inside where they distribute that fuel. So we have to go out and work with fuel distributors, build infrastructure, and try to grow the availability is what we do. A little bit about, we talked about renewable diesel. Again, mostly out in the low carbon markets, California area. We do have, as you saw, we don't have a biodiesel plant. This is the old biodiesel plant from Beatrice that is in Nebraska. It's currently being used as to clean feedstock to go to the renewable diesel plant in western North Dakota. So, still utilizing it, but they're not making biodiesel. Here's the new renewable diesel plant coming online, hopefully later this year, mid-year, late year, in Hastings, Nebraska. Again, a lot of that'll be using, I believe, be using a lot of animal fats, feedstock. The renewable diesel people like that for that product, which is great. I mean, we need the soybean oil, we need the corn oil, all of that for biodiesel as well. They can also go in renewable diesel. It's just we need all of these products to keep the market going. Sustainable aviation fuel, you guys may have heard about that. There's been talk in Phelps County here. You know, that's a huge opportunity for a market. We'll see where that goes. It's, you know, part of the hang-up, and Brad is a lot better expert, obviously, on 45Z than I am. I'm starting to get my head wrapped around it, but for the credits that come along with it, basically our grand challenge is to be able to produce it in mass and produce it at a price that the airlines buy. You can also, obviously, one of the feedstocks is ethanol. You can use ethanol alcohol and turn that into jet. So there's a lot of opportunities out there that could bring a net back to the farm. 35 billion gallon production by 2050, we're going to meet everything that we wanted to. Nebraska's got a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit, basically 75 cents a gallon if it reduces life cycle emissions by at least 50%, and anything over that, it's incremental 1 cent per gallon for anything over 50%, so if you've got 60%, you gain another 10 cents. What did that do? That prompted the announcement in a few areas, Phelps County being one, from MEG Fuels to announce that they were going to build and start production of a plant here in Phelps County for sustainable aviation out of wastes. I think I've heard, talking with Blake, that there's quite a bit of pushback on that, and whether that'll go or not is kind of up in the air. But Nebraska is trying to bring some of that to the state as well. So here's a big thing. You know, if you don't take much else away from this, please understand this. If this goes away, if the biodiesel market were to go away on your 1,000-acre farm, that could cost you at $11.33, whatever soybeans are, the day I did this. And last year's Nebraska 65.5 bushels an acre average. It could go, I mean, you could lose $96,000 just right out the window. So I get asked a lot, so how is the price of biodiesel? How is it compared to diesel? You know, Brad was talking about 45Z, that's one component of turning that into fuel. We also have renewable volume obligations we'll talk about a little bit quick. But ultimately, let's say you're using 6 gallons an acre. If you've got a 1,000-acre farm, let's just even say it costs, 20 cents a gallon more to have a 20% biodiesel what is that? That's $1,200. It costs you to keep this industry going that's bringing you $96,000 plus in value back to your 1,000-acre soybean farm. So it's really not that much. People get kind of caught up in it, and the price is the price, but if you really look at the cost versus the value, again, we're going to keep talking, year of uncertainty. As Brad mentioned, we finally have the 45Z proposal. That's helpful. We basically started 2025 with basically a new credit, a new producer's credit. We had a biodiesel blender's credit for years, and we started 2025 with a biodiesel production credit that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, went into effect January 1st, 2025, and we had no rules of guidance, zero. I mean, it was horrible for the industry, had a dramatic effect on the industry, drove prices of the product up, drove production down, had some plants go idle, and here we are, as Brad mentioned, beginning of February, we finally got the proposal. So we're, 15 or 13, a little over 13 months it took us to actually find out the rules around what we needed to know in order to monetize these credits from the production side. So you can imagine, just like he said, if they don't have a guarantee on these credits and what the value of them is going to be. The other side that we were hit with is, soybean, canola, some of those crops, through their GREET model, when they're factoring the value of these feedstocks, they were significantly reduced because they were hit with an incorrect land use change negative to them. So that's been removed in the new rules, which is great. So that's very helpful. And we got the new administration, and yes, we went through 2025, but there was a lot left undone that they had to figure out. We're finally getting to the point where they're getting it figured out. So 45Z coming later. Here's kind of the effect it had. So 2024 did 5.5 billion gallons roughly consumed of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and we were maybe 3.5 in 2025. Drastic impact to the markets. We're hoping with the new rules and everything getting kind of finalized in 2026 is gonna start shooting back up, and then as we roll into 2027, all of the growth that we were seeing from 21, 22, 23, 24, we're hoping that we get that growth as well. It got cut off. So 5% in 2021, biodiesel, renewable diesel were 5% of the total diesel pool in 2021, and they had made it to 9% in 2024 before we got these setbacks of these rules. Waiting game, we're waiting on the finalization. I think that I was one that asked, do we see, Brad seems to be the expert on the 45Z. I was wondering, being these rules were just proposed, do we worry about something different coming out of the final rule or not? Thankfully, he feels like they're pretty solid on that. That's good for the industry because the industry needs some certainty to operate. We're waiting for the renewable volume obligations. There's proposals out there where our understanding is any time now we should be seeing that. March. There's a lot of pieces around that can affect the market. RIN allocations, small refinery exemption, and the RIN reallocation. So hopefully, fingers crossed. I mean, the Trump administration from EPA came out with a really nice bump in their renewable volume obligation numbers that everybody was pretty happy with, and just hoping that those don't get squashed some by a large amount of small refinery exemptions. A lot of things that are driving kind of helped the market survive a little bit in 2025 are all the state biodiesel policies. Nebraska's got a 14 cents a gallon on B100 retailer tax credit. Not a ton. If you're 10%, that's 1.4 cents. If you're 20%, you're 2.8. But it's something. it's helpful. Minnesota's got a mandate, so people that ask me, can I use biodiesel as a change, have we been having trouble? I think we're in our 7th or 8th year in Minnesota, 20% mandate from April through September. Used in pretty much everything. Logging gets a little exemption, rail gets a little exemption, home building gets a little exemption, but everything else, tractors, trucks, city, county government equipment, all using 20%. You can see the other thing, the low carbon fuel standard between biodiesel and renewable diesel. California's low carbon fuel standard drove it from 16 million gallons in 2011 to 2.2 billion gallons in 2023. So I think they said currently 70% of the fuel burned in California is renewable, whether it's biodiesel or renewable diesel or a blend of the two. Just some more biodiesel, basically what's consumed. You can see the biodiesel portion remains fairly steady. The renewable diesel is where it's really taking off as far as the growth. Obviously, you take a small refinery that can produce a lot more gallons than a biodiesel plant can, but we're basically looking to use that biodiesel in the Midwest and send that renewable diesel to the coast where they have low carbon fuel standards in order to keep that value propped up. Well, there it is, 2024. 9% of all the fuel consumed, which, as we're talking about trying to get to 15% ethanol and some of those things, we're 10.5% of the fuel market, something like that, I think, with ethanol right now. So considering where biodiesel is, and we've gotten just about 10% of the fuel market, that's pretty impressive. So what's it doing? Again, it's another area where this is for you guys driving value to your bottom line by helping yourself. We've got 2 new crushing plants, potentially a 3rd, and currently Nebraska can crush 70% of their soybean crop in state. So that's huge for basis, it's huge for a lot of things for you guys. So one other thing, and you can grab it if you guys, I've got some of these sheets over on my table. Basically, Nebraska MEG Corp has got an on-farm biodiesel credit. It's up to $500. Again, like I said, if your worst case scenario is it costs you $1,200 on 1,000 acres more to run biodiesel, here's another avenue to reduce that cost. Very simple QR code, very easy to apply for. Just some of them I don't know how you can see, it's kind of small print, but again, John Deere announced the B30, as I mentioned, and pretty much all engine manufacturers have approved up to B20, and a few that have B100 and B30. So from an engine manufacturer or warranty standard, there's no concerns whatsoever there based on the current ESDM specifications. Go the right way here. And if your certain engine doesn't, there's also a protection out there, Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. They have to prove that the fuel caused a problem if they're going to try to avoid their warranty. They can't just say because we used 40% biodiesel or 30% biodiesel or 20, and we don't prove that, we avoid your warranty. They have to prove that the fuel caused a problem. There's just a little bit of history of where we were, where we came. High sulfur diesel for 73 years. Had too much pollution according to the EPA. So they dropped it from 5,000 parts per million down to 500 parts per million in 1993. 1998, biodiesel became commercially available. 2006, 80% of the highway diesel produced had to be ultra-low sulfur, so we went 5,000 parts per million sulfur down to 500 parts per million in 1993. 2006 down to 15 parts per million. And it was great for the environment. Obviously, farmers found out they needed to start adding sulfur back into the fertilizers because we weren't getting it from acid rain and it wasn't just naturally there on the field. 2011, renewable diesel started coming along. In 2014, all fuel had to be ultra-low sulfur diesel. Lubricity was one of the number 1 issues that came out of there. The other thing is sulfur was a great antimicrobial. So if you have water in the bottom of your tank and you had 500 parts per million sulfur diesel, nothing would grow. You got 1 inch of water in your tank, no big deal. 2 inches of water in your tank, no big deal. 3 inches, just raise your suction pipe and you're good to go again. Nothing's going to grow, nothing's going to give you much of trouble. Well, today, it uses the water for oxygen and the fuel for food, and it grows right there, and there's no sulfur anymore to help keep it under control. So that's where your microbial contaminations come from. Paraffin wax, it does not, because of the process of making up full of sulfur, it no longer holds wax up in cold weather as well. So as soon as it hits that cloud point, maybe 10 degrees in Nebraska, that wax wants to drop all of that fuel if you want to have some kind of additive there. Ultra low sulfur has a natural affinity for water because of the process and when it's created. And the stability. We used to hit 500 parts per million of sulfur. You could have that stuff around for probably 10 years, fill up just like it was, like you water yesterday, no issue. Well, our fuel now is probably it's got to be good for at least 6 months. Most of it's good for at least a year. Premium additives will get you extended life on that, but it's not like it was. And we're starting to see more corrosion issues linked up also. So some of the myths on the biodiesel. Biodiesel has a shorter shelf life, which is not true. They all have the SDO specifications. They can all be treated with premium additives and stabilizers to last longer than that. In the biodiesel world, they're putting more stabilizers in there just to make darn sure that it does not destabilize any quicker than what the petroleum piece of it was. It's still got 80% petroleum, 20% biodiesel. They want to make sure that the biodiesel does not cause any problems. Biodiesel causes microbial contamination is a myth. Basically, the water in the diesel fuel, so if you eliminate your water from your tank, you're not going to have microbial contamination. We actually see, we work with a lot of fuel additives in the fall. We work in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, or Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota, and we do in North Dakota, and we check the fuel tank for this particular retailer. All of their fuel tanks just as a maintenance going into winter. And one thing we find is we might find in North Dakota, Wisconsin, and South Dakota where they don't have a mandate on biodiesel. We're finding maybe a 30% return on issues where we're finding water in the tanks. It might not be enough water to get into the customer's vehicle, but we're finding water at the bottom of the tanks that they want to get out of there. Minnesota, we're finding like 2 to 5% of tanks will have some kind of moisture at the bottom. So as they're running through the summer with that 20% bio, it's keeping that moisture out of those tanks. Biodiesel blends even at low levels cause fuel to gel. Basically, a lot of what we see when people think they're gelling at 20 degrees is basically got to do with water. We're seeing water freeze in filters. Biodiesel does not drop out of the fuel even when it gets cold. What will plug a filter would be glycerin if it's off spec. The diesel will drop out the paraffin wax on your filters. So one thing to look for if you're using biodiesel or not using biodiesel, or if you're using biodiesel and wondering if biodiesel is a cause of a filter plugging, cut that filter open, put it on your bench overnight at 60 degrees plus, and if all of that product that's plugged your filter evaporates back into liquid, then that was a paraffin issue. If it was a biodiesel issue, you'd have to get it up to 150 degrees to get that to go back into solution. Again, water contamination is our biggest issue. There's talk about a glycerin buildup, non-glyceride. That's what it would look like. You'd have to heat that to 150 degrees to get that to go back into solution. On paraffin wax, you're looking at 60 degrees that'll go back into solution. So it'll turn into a liquid, so you can kind of have an idea of what really caused the problems. I also have a little flyer over there. A lot of people like to have at their farms for fuel. It's got six different kind of these common diesel issues that if you're going to cut your filter open, you can look at it and see maybe what the issue was. So best practices, buy premium diesel or use an additive to prolong the shelf life. Keep storage and vehicle equipment tanks topped off. If you've got frost on the outside of your tank, you've got frost on the inside, that's all eventually going to go to the bottom of when that melts. If you have tanks half full, you've got air and oxygen moving through there, and when the temperature drops, that's got moisture in it. That air's got moisture in it. When the temperature drops, it'll no longer be able to hold that moisture. It'll drop that in your tank, so if you're keeping them full, you have less airflow going through there. Check your hoses, caps. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone out to a farm and look at the barrel and the cap where they fill it's laying wide open, and it's got rain in it, and then they wonder why they have water in their tank and why they're getting a microbial problem. We always recommend in the winter, in your fall, a 30 micron filter dispensers. If fuel gets thicker, it's higher viscosity as it gets colder. 30 microns is going to be plenty to stop anything getting into your equipment. People ask me, well, I got a 2 or a 5 micron filter on my tractor. Why do you need more on your equipment? I mean, it's already going to stop. But one big thing people got to think about is you're not sending anywhere near the amount of gallons through that 2 or 5 micron filter on the tractor as you are through your dispensing equipment. So just makes it easier, gets your fuel flowing better. It's plenty tight enough to get any contaminants out that you should have any concern with. And when using additives, remember one, make sure you're blending all that in well before it gets cold, when it's about at least 10 degrees above the thaw point. Same thing with biodiesel, if you're blending it. It's got to be 10 degrees above the thaw point to make sure the two products blend. Mentioned we got the diesel helpline. I also have cards back there that so you guys can grab to reach out to us with any problems. That's free of charge to you. One thing I ask is if you're having a fuel problem, get me a sample of that fuel that you actually had a problem with before you throw a bunch of additives at it, before you throw a bunch of stuff and it gets to the lab. I tell you there's nothing wrong with the fuel because you've already corrected the problem by whatever you've done, but I don't know that, so whatever fuel you're having trouble with, just try to make sure that that's the fuel we get, not something that you've tried to, after you've tried to fix the issue. B20 in the summer, B5 in the winter, it keeps your fuel system clean, keeps your fuel injectors clean, and B5 in the winter performs the same as ultra low sulfur. So if you're going to additize your diesel, if it's 0%, you're going to additize it, you do the same thing with B5. If you're going to blend it with number 1, you do the same thing with B5. Pretty simple that way, up to 5% in the winter. A lot of good resources out here on biodieselne.com. If you've got more questions, we've got a regional diesel helpline on Facebook. A lot of times we're setting on diesel tips and best practices. And that's my contact information as well. If you need that for any reason, I'm the one that travels to Nebraska, kind of the for our company. So happy to help you, I'd be happy to help look at your tank, help you convert to using biodiesel, whatever concerns there might be out there. Any questions?
Brad, we had one question come in. What blend of biodiesel can you run in Tier 2 and Tier 3 diesel engines?
So everybody pretty much, I don't know anybody, I mean obviously we see people run up to 50%, but all engine manufacturers have pretty much approved up to 20%. And that's what the ASTM specification is. And hopefully before long we'll have a new ASTM specification that includes up to 30%.
So this is a place where we can really help ourselves. We're not in the fuel business. We're not trying to sell fuel here today. But Blake opened our eyes to how much the difference we can make in our markets by using ethanol and using biodiesel. Our fuel supplier, who we appreciate very much and depend on him a lot, was very slow to the party. He didn't have soy diesel, didn't want to deal with it. We finally told him, we're buying soy diesel next year. We want to buy from you. They're selling soy diesel. So I would encourage you to, the people you do business with, the people you buy fuel from, make sure that everybody is using at least E15 and using at least 5% biodiesel. We're going to be switching to biodiesel here at 5% on our next loads. And this summer we'll be going to 20 here at Nebraska land. We're going to be E15, we've always been E10. But we're going to be doing everything we can to support you guys. And we need to be allowed to make sure that all your other suppliers are doing the same thing. Just like Ted mentioned, get loud with the people who represent us in Congress. Let's get E15 mandated. There's a lot of things we can do to help ourselves. As far as the cost of soy diesel goes, today the current prices that are being quoted for number 2 clear, 324 with soy. I gotta get to the right one here. I'm sorry. Premium number 2 clear with additive 325. B5 soy clear 321 is 4 cents cheaper. I can tell you that Boston ones here in Holdridge are handling soy diesel. Aurora Co-op handles soy diesel, and Joey Robinson or Trainer handles soy diesel. I'm sure there's others, but those are the 3 locals that I know for sure are handling it. If your supplier's not, give one of those guys a call.
I know CPI as well handles it. I don't know how far west they come with it, but I know they have it on a lot of their sites.
I'm going to be 50 or semis, probably 5 years. Always get caught a little bit in the winter. Before I blend it down, what's your favorite anti-gel? We've got a shot power surface that usually works.
Yeah, so a couple things, and I should have touched on this a little bit about renewable diesel too. One thing we're seeing a little bit of, and I wonder sometimes if they can't get enough rail cars or they're not getting it out of these production facilities and out to California low carbon markets, but the cloud point on renewable diesel stuff we're seeing is 15 to 25 degrees. But one thing we're seeing with renewable diesel is you cannot advertise it. It will not. There isn't an additive on the market that I know of right now that will lower that operability of that renewable diesel. We've tried all kinds of things, and people are working on an additive. Really, you can cut it with some number 1 diesel to try to get it flow better. But in answer to your question, there's a lot of good additives out there. We sell additives on another side of our business in bulk fuel. The biggest key is making sure that whatever additive you're using has a good amount of wax antiseptic agent in it. That's the number 1 key today of basically you can take your product or whatever the cloud point is. If you've got a B50, that cloud point's probably 25 degrees or 20 degrees. You can maybe move that with a good additive down to 15. If you have a cloud point at 10, you can move that down to -10. But the biggest key today with the ultra-low sulfur and wanting to drop its wax at its cloud point is make sure you got a good wax antiseptic agent packaging.
Aurora gets ours from Sergeant. That's all soy, right?
That is correct. Yeah, and most of all that is, you look at those markets. I mentioned a lot of animal fats going into renewable diesel. They also use a lot of animal fats from biodiesel down in Texas, Florida area, where there's a little warmer climate. It's got a little bit higher cloud point. So most stuff we see up here, we're seeing canola oil, corn oil, that comes out of the dried distiller grains. They're taking that and sucking the oil out of there and turning it into biodiesel. And then soybean oil. That's pretty much the plants in the kind of Midwest, upper Midwest. That's pretty much what they're using for feedstocks.
Eric Lawson, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
You bet. Thanks for having me.